What is your reaction to the report?
Well, I think what this report does is it confirms that the federal government didn't have a comprehensive, detailed plan to deal with COVID-19 outbreaks in residential aged care. For the families and the loved ones of the 667 older Australians that have died in residential aged care today, that is an absolute tragedy. The report confirms that the government didn't do enough and didn't do it soon enough, which is what Labor has been saying all along. We've tried to be supportive of the government throughout this process during COVID-19. We've offered the government solutions and ideas. And frankly, the government didn't do enough and didn't do it fast enough. And the report says that.
Well,
What we need now is action to actually get these recommendations implemented and implemented quickly.
OK, we'll get to that in a second, but just on the point of the government not having a plan, the government, as you heard from Senator Colbeck just then, he says it did have a plan, and that has been in place since January. But since January, it's been evolving, given what's gone on with the pandemic and the crisis. So do you accept that?
Well, I think that's an admission that the government has been scrambling to try and get a comprehensive, detailed plan ever since the Royal Commission called it out just a few weeks ago. But it's not just the Royal Commission that said the government doesn't have a detailed, comprehensive plan. The New South Wales government, in its response to the outbreaks in New South Wales, has clearly said that the federal government didn't have a detailed, comprehensive plan to deal with COVID-19 outbreaks in aged care in Australia. That is the tragedy of all this. If the government had done more and done it faster, we might not be where we are today.
The government has accepted the recommendations, though. Is that enough?
Well, we need to see these recommendations implemented and implemented quickly. I think the Australian public are lacking confidence in this government and the minister to actually deliver this. They've been given a deadline of 1 December. That is just 8 weeks to implement these recommendations. We will do everything we can to support the government to implement the recommendations and do it quickly. Labor has been calling for some time for better infection control, for better training of staff, for more staff on site in facilities during COVID-19. So we want to do everything we can to support the government to implement it. But frankly, given they still haven't implemented the first recommendation fully from the interim report over 12 months ago, I think the public will lack confidence they're able to do this.
How do you ensure safe visits for the elderly?
Well, clearly the Royal Commission is very concerned that older Australians, some of them suffered terribly from loneliness, from depression and anxiety because of the lack of visitors throughout this period. You know, it's a tragedy that we've had families had to say goodbye over FaceTime. It is absolute tragedy for those families and loved ones, for people who have died in residential aged care, but also for those families who have loved ones who've been unwell during this period in residential aged care. So we need to do everything we can. And the report clearly says they need more staff with training to deal with visitors, to allow people that contact with their family members and their loved ones. It's absolutely critical for these older Australians to be able to have that. And the government should have done more about this and should have fixed it sooner.
Well, I mean, quite a few people who aren't in politics who I spoke to last night, when looking at those recommendations and looking at parts of that report, suggested I can't see how these plans weren't already in place as the pandemic took hold. Is that an opinion that you're hearing from your constituents as well?
Sadly, we're getting contact from all over Australia, from residents, from families and from loved ones, saying that they are very concerned that there doesn't seem to have been a comprehensive plan, that all of this wasn't thought through much, much earlier. We have been trying to put pressure on the government to do more and to do it faster, but everything seems to take forever and it's not done comprehensively enough when it's being implemented. And that is our concerns about the government having to implement these recommendations by 1 December in just 8 weeks.
This is going to need more money. The budget comes down next week, as you know. What would be your message to Josh Frydenberg and Matthias Cormann?
Well, my message to them is older Australians have suffered terribly throughout this pandemic, particularly those who are in residential aged care and their families, and we need to do more to protect them better. And frankly, you know, the government still has the interim recommendations from the Royal Commission's first interim report, that first recommendation to deal with home care packages. There still are over 100,000 older Australians waiting for home care in Australia. And then we've got the COVID-19 outbreaks. Clearly, the government needs to do much, much more. The problem here, of course, is they ripped billions out in their first few years of government, and they've been trying to make up for it ever since. We've had a lot of splashy announcements, but frankly, they've come to very little, and aged care is still in crisis in Australia. Australia. It was in crisis prior to the Royal Commission, and it's still in crisis.
But what specifically do you need, in terms of money, in terms of finances? How much money is needed in certain areas? Do you have a point on that?
Well, that's obviously up to the government. The Royal Commission has said this has to be done within 8 weeks. So the government has to make decisions and find the funding within 8 weeks to deal with these recommendations. And then we have the interim report's recommendations about home care packages. Labor, unfortunately, is not in government. This government has had 7 years of neglect in aged care, and now they're trying to scramble and make up for it. They need to fix it, and they need to fix it quickly.
OK. Shadow Aged Care Minister Julie Collins, thanks for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Okay.